Lebanon is a small country with less than 7 million people. It's 9 times smaller than Portugal in land area and is located on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Lebanon was at the centre of banking, commerce and tourism in the region. The capital city, Beirut, attracted so many tourists it was formerly known as the Paris of the Middle East. Companies operating around the Mediterranean and Gulf states often set up their headquarters in Lebanon's capital because of its superior infrastructure and economic stability at the time. Lebanon's geographical position at the crossroads of Europe and the Arab countries established its prime locational advantage for moving goods between each region, primarily oil. The country reached the peak of its economic success in the mid-1960s and was seen as a bastion of economic strength by the oil-rich Persian Gulf Arab states, whose funds helped to further transform Lebanon's infrastructure and economy. However, today, Lebanon is far from a bastion of economic strength, being subject to one of the worst financial collapses the world has seen in more than 150 years. Daily necessities are unaffordable, and over half the country lives below the poverty line. How did the country go from one of the most stable economies of its time to one on the brink of collapse? Firstly, Lebanon faced a brutal 15-year civil war, which raged from 1975 to 1990. It costed the country over 120,000 lives and resulted in an exodus of almost 1 million people from Lebanon. After the civil war, Lebanon rebuilt through tourism, foreign aid and large donations from Gulf Arab states. Following this, the country faced 3 decades of corruption by successive governments following the civil war. Corruption had always existed in the country, but it was magnified after the end of the war in 1990. Lebanon's situation was made even worse by the global COVID pandemic in 2020 and the deadly blast in Beirut port the 4th of August 2020. Fire detonated nearly 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, which had been stored unsafely in the warehouse for 6 years at the port. The explosion was responsible for billions of dollars worth of damage and also destroyed a substantial amount of the port's grain silos. Lastly, the impact of a raging war in Ukraine poses a serious threat to food security in Lebanon. The country currently imports 80% of its grain from Ukraine and Russia. However, since the start of the war, the Kremlin's blockade on Ukrainian grain exports via the Black Sea has sent bread prices skyrocketing. On average in Lebanon, food items today cost about 10 times more than they did in 2019. Ukraine's grain exports have slumped since the start of the war, driving up global food prices. And to top things off, the grain silos at Beirut port have partially collapsed nearly 2 years after the initial chemical explosion at the port. The vast silos acted as a shield for the western part of the city, however in doing so were heavily damaged by the explosion. The cause of the silos' total collapse was a weeks-long fire triggered by grains that fermented and ignited in the summer heat. Lebanon has received some good news, however, as Russia has lifted its 5-month blockade of Ukraine in the Black Sea, meaning we should start to see at least some shipments of grain to countries such as Lebanon, hopefully slightly easing the food crisis. Overall, Lebanon today is nearly incomparable to what it was 60 years ago. Facing disaster after disaster, the country is in one of the worst economic crises the world has seen in the last 150 years. Hopefully the situation in Lebanon can be somewhat resolved, but one thing's for sure, it won't be quick, and it certainly won't be an easy task. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.